Nepal, and all those celebrating in India. A very good afternoon and good evening to you all, wherever you are from. Thank you for joining in. Welcome to this AIDIA book discussion on Act-East Policy and Northeast India with author Dr. Sreeradha Datta. Today, we have an esteemed panel consisting of the author herself, Dr. Sreeradha Datta, Professor Amena Mohsin from Dhaka University, who will be the book discussant today, Mr. Sunil, CEO, Asian Institute of Diplomacy and International Affairs, Kathmandu, Nepal. So let me begin by commending our very special speaker, Dr. Sreeradha Datta ma'am, for an insightful and interesting book, which could not have been more timelier than the present, considering the unfolding of the events in the countries that are important to India's Act-East and important to India's national security and economic interests. A little background, India's Look-East policy was launched by the former Prime Minister P.V. Narasimha Rao in 1991. The main focus of this policy was to shift countries' trading focus to neighbors, connectivity and other areas to the booming Southeast Asian countries. As India had opened up its market for the world, reaching out to immediate neighbors was viable, trustworthy and reachable. While connecting with neighbors like Myanmar and Bangladesh was important for trade and security, the policy was at the heart of developing the northeast region of India that had for long been holding the potential. This policy continued till the formation of NDA government in 2014, after which the newly formed government under PM Narendra Modi upgraded it to Act-East policy as at the East Asia Summit in Myanmar in November 2014. At this outset, ma'am, your book covers issues from economic potential of India's Northeast region, the connectivity within Northeast region and beyond, energy potential, and most importantly, the question of political instability, where you deal with some serious complexities of the region like insurgency, political disquiet, and geographical constraints. Above all, what indulges the most is a section of CAA and NRC, which for all of us is a topic of interest. So now before I hand over to ma'am, I request Mr. Sunil to kindly deliver his welcome address. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Rishi, for organizing such a beautiful event today in the honor of Dr. Sreeradha Datta, who is a very close friend to AIDIA, and we have been working quite closely in various aspects of Nepal, India, and on BVIN or on EU South Asia aspects. And I think this is the first time that we are discussing on the book project, and it's a great honor for us, to have Dr. Datta. He is one of the key speaker and who has written this book. And I think I also welcome all of the distinguished panelists in this meeting today, being organized by Rishi Gupta ji and Sajina Rai from AIDIA. As you know that India's Northeast plays an important role in Nepal's connection with the globe. As a landlocked country, Nepal has been up to explore various opportunities of trade, transit, connectivity, and the intent, and spirit of India's Act-East policy fits into very well. And we have numerous areas of the cooperation, starting with energy, transit, trade, security, development, academia, and so on. While the government of Nepal is keen in developing relations with the countries like Bangladesh, recently our president visited Bangladesh, is a testimony to that. We believe that it is not possible, without India's help and support in facilitating it. We have potential transit routes of rail, roads, energy, also the waterways is new beginning in our connectivity, as well as developing manufacturing units and exploring opportunities. So there are greater opportunities for investment in this region as well. I hope during the discussion, Dr. Sreeradha Datta will enlighten us on the problems, challenges, and potential that Nepal, India's Northeast and Southeast Asian neighbors hold. Let me congratulate Dr. Sreeradha Datta on her book once again. Thank you so much, and I look forward to have the very constructive discussion. Thank you once again.
Okay. So thank you, Sunilji, for your address. I'm sure our esteemed author will touch upon the fact that how important are the Himalayan countries for India's Northeast region, as well as Act-East policy. Before I invite the author, a few words about her. With a PhD from JNU, academician Dr. Sreeradha Datta has been the director of prestigious Maulana Abul Kalam Azad Institute of Asian Studies, Kolkata, and held fellowships with the Institute of Defense Studies and Analysis, New Delhi, among other institutions. She has written 6 books and monographs on Bangladesh, Southeast Asia, Myanmar, and Northeast. She has also published over 130 articles in journals, edited volumes, newspapers, and academic websites. She has co-edited a volume on Bangladesh at 50, Development and Challenges in 2020. While we are discussing her latest book, we have another surprise that another book of hers, an edited volume titled Bimstick and the Journey and Way Ahead, is likely to be out by the next month. She serves on the academic boards of several universities and think tanks and is a regular participant in Track 2 dialogues with Bangladesh, Myanmar, Nepal, and China. She currently heads the Neighborhood Studies Center of the Vivekananda International Foundation, New Delhi, and is also a non-resident senior fellow at the Institute of South Asian Studies, National University of Singapore. Now I invite Dr. Sreeradha Datta ma'am to kindly make her presentation. Over to you, ma'am. Ma'am, please unmute yourself.
Yeah. Thanks, Rishi. This is very nice to be here. And of course, foremost thanks to Sunil and the full team at IDEA, Sajina especially. We've been working together, as Sunil mentioned. It's always a pleasure to be here. And also this whole collaboration where I feel a Nepal Institute hosting me, and I have Professor Amena, and I know who keeps very, very busy. And this is really a busy time of the year for her. And I'm very grateful that she agreed to read this room. It's a pretty voluminous book. So it's, I think, a wonderful collaboration that we are having here. And I'm really grateful to all of you. So very quickly, let me try and introduce the book in the next 15 or 20 minutes. And I'm hoping that the book will be available in Nepal soon. I'm not sure that the publishers joined us, Rishi, but anyway, I'm hoping that the book should reach outside.
I think there is somebody from the publisher.
Okay, so I hope they see the interest that's happening elsewhere, and the book should be made available in other, outside India. So of course, this is pandemic time. It's not that we are very often there in the bookstores, but Amazon's doing well apparently with the book. So that's something. Okay, so the book has 6 chapters, and this is apart from the introduction and a postscript. So let me, for some of you who don't understand or don't follow the Northeast region, let me try and kind of contextualize the study for you. It of course begins with a subcontinent partition, which actually introduced this geopolitical isolation of the Northeast, which subsequently to the partition then only had a linkage with the rest of India through a very narrow 21 kilometers land corridor. So as we see now, the Northeast actually shares more than 99% of its external borders with the rest, outside India, and only 1% is basically with India. So it also tells you why there's so much of ramification about what happens in the immediate neighborhood. There's an immediate fallout always of the Northeast. For very long, political scientists have often referred to, the geographical distance that exists between India and the rest, between the rest of India and the Northeast. And obviously, for that, there is, given the physical disconnect, there is certainly a huge impact on how trade and commerce has always been affected. But apart from the trade and the commerce and the physical linkages, it's also, introduced a level of socio-political isolation. And which, in fact, of course, as you know, Northeast is a ethnic mosaic. And this isolation in some positive ways also, allowed the distinct flavor of the region to actually develop. And of course, while there are many positive inputs about that, but of course, it's also held a lot of challenges in mind in terms of, how to manage it, how to take it forward. And while, of course, I'm very conscious of the fact that while I'm constantly going to be referring to this region as the Northeast, I really want to make a very clear distinction, especially for the younger students here on this platform today, that when we discuss Northeast, it's basically 8 Northeast states, from Arunachal, Assam, Meghalaya, Mizoram, Manipur, Tripura, they are all very, very different. While for the sake of, making it easy, while we often discuss it and put it all together under the rubric of Northeast, even when we are discussing Act East, I would actually, bring it to your attention that it's not that the entire Northeast is taken up with this whole Act East because of the physical disconnect. It's simply not possible. So for the Act East purpose, I would actually, kind of highlight that it's basically Tripura, Assam, Manipur and Mizoram who play a greater, and Meghalaya, of course, who plays a greater role. Again, it's more for geographical reasons than anything else. And again, each state, very distinctive, has its own particular, not only political entity, but its ethnic mosaic, its cultural moorings, its economic development, and the entire progress is very dependent on how it's placed. So what we find in Assam is impossible to find that or locate that in Arunachal Pradesh. The flora and fauna of Arunachal Pradesh can't be matched with, again, what we find in Manipur or say Tripura. So each flora and fauna is different, and there's a very distinct role that each. But again, for today's sake, and even while we do other studies, we often try and club it together. But I'm just saying for young students here, do keep that in mind, that when we discuss Northeast, it's not that every 8 states it's applicable to that. So from independence time, we've seen that the region has always needed a lot of political accommodation. It also needed economic support. And of course, over the years, we've seen how Assam was broken into different parts. There's still demand for a separate state from certain sections in Nagaland. There's always been, to handle the ethnic mosaic, to handle each their own distinctive requirements and needs. Many administrative concessions had to be done over time. So initially, in the initial years, you find that there was a kind of a fervent political churning that was taking place in the Northeast. But right now, as we see that that's actually gradually subsided, there's been a lot of management issues which has been handled by the central and the state government. And there is now, I would say, a kind of a certain internal stability which is visible, which is also, in fact, this internal stability has also led to the idea that, the vast unexplored natural resources which Northeast actually offer needs to be tapped. And one of the foremost resources, and which again has been pretty evident and viable, has been the tourism circuit. But of course, this book delves into far greater details about different aspects of it. But let me also, before I start looking at the chapters more closely, also try and explain why has Northeast assumed such salience in contemporary India's foreign policy. First and foremost, of course, you would realize in the last decade and 15 years maybe, that there has been a very strong interest and effort on India's part to deepen its engagement with the neighbors, both with South Asia and the Southeast economies also. And Northeast is core. Again, as I said, it shares borders with not only the South Asian economies, Nepal, Bangladesh, Bhutan, but also with our, Myanmar. And we are doing a lot of work with the Southeast economies right now. We, of course, I'll talk about that later in details, but, there is no way that you can ignore Northeast if you're looking at your neighborhood. So Northeast has, gathered that salience. Also, in the last several decades, we've seen that India has taken a greater interest in regionalism and sub-regionalism. While SARC, of course, is lying dormant for a number of factors, but there is a sub-regional effect, which as I think Sunil just referred to, the BBI, which is Bangladesh, Bhutan, India, Nepal sub-region grouping that has actually, without a formal establishment or institution, there is an informality to it. But again, it's actually on a positive trajectory. And we are hoping that the motor vehicle agreement will be signed and be able to move on. But apart from this also, BIMSTEC, again, all of us are part of BIMSTEC, Nepal, Bangladesh, India. There are 7 countries, 2 of Southeast Asia and 5 of South Asia who are part of it. Again, if you're looking at BIMSTEC, any sub-regional, Northeast again is right in the middle. So there is no way that when we are discussing any of this that we can ignore this region. Also, and I think that has in the recent contemporary global developments, and I think which is now assuming far greater importance than anything else, is this new activism, the new activity of the international players or the global players that we find in Indo-Pacific. And the fact that India also is taking its claim in the extended littorals. And then again, if you look at the littorals, you'll see that Northeast states dovetails with this, the whole region in terms of the Bay of Bengal and the Indian Ocean. So again, if you're staking your claim, if you're, being active partners in many of the new exercises and new arrangements that are being discussed at the with global players, there is no way that you can ignore the Northeast. So of course it's becoming, but more importantly, and I think that is where ACTI's policy and the book also comes in, is, for a greater part of time, and I did skim over the fact that Northeast in the initial years went through huge turbulence. The ethnic mosaic was difficult to handle. Each one wanted a certain domain territory. Each one, there was lots of adjustments and negotiations and concessions that had to be made. But so largely Northeast at that point of time, in the initial 30 years, I would say, was really the domain for the security establishment to engage with. And, central and state governments were just happy to see that, that's being managed. So there was very little focus at that time in terms of this developmental trajectory, which actually changed with the Look East policy that was initiated in the early 1990s. And of course, it coincided with two, again, main factors. One was that India was liberalizing its economy. It was earlier much more closed. Of course, apart from the liberalizing of the economy, it was also from that, security domain that I said, the security narrative was changing to a much more larger narrative of how we could introduce developmental trajectory. And I think that is where the whole discourse changed, and for the better, I would say. So, while Look East policy, which was initiated, did very good work in terms of establishing engagement with the economies of the East and Southeast Asian countries. There was a huge amount of trade and commerce that India was able to do with those rising tiger economies, as they were called at that point of time. But unfortunately, somehow the Northeast region was kind of bypassed in this whole interaction with the economies of both East and Southeast Asia and South Asia. This was the gap that was attempted to be, closed by this recoining of the Look East policy into an Act East policy. But I think the whole effort by Prime Minister Modi was to ensure that when we are doing this outreach with the immediate and the extended neighborhood, the Northeast region should play a very extensive role. And, towards actualizing that Act East policy, what we saw that India unveiled a strong developmental plan in the Northeast region. This is not to ever suggest that this is the first time the development plans were being discussed, but this is actually, and again, there isn't time to discuss a 350 or 370 pages book in a matter of 15 minutes. But while there were many such policies being discussed in the past, and there were lots of projects that are also ongoing, but the kind of thrust that Northeast got post 2014 is something of a milestone. And so there was not only a network of roads and highways being built, there were investment fairs being encouraged in every state almost. There were lots of tourism projects being undertaken. More importantly, India realized that you have to also bring educational institute to the region, which again was lagging behind for obvious reasons, because when there was no development, there was no connectivity, that was not, good public health care, and education was something which is always lagging behind. But those were the, kind of main focus that has subsequently taken over when Act East policy was kind of implemented. This, in fact, essentially becomes my first chapter of the book, where I explain and examine how the potential, why the Northeast is actually important and critical in this Act East policy. I subsequently, in fact, I must say here at this point that, my first book I ever wrote was actually on the Northeast, and this was very much, I think, a little more than 20 years, yes. And when I came back to Northeast again to write this, I went back to my old notes in whatever form it was. And I realized that even then, the book also, my previous book also, and even my notes constantly talked about how there was so much of potential. That whole buzz about economic potential was always there about the Northeast. Because as I said, there's abundance of flora and fauna, abundance of natural resources. But again, while I was actually writing this book, I realized the buzz was only a buzz. I mean, there was very little actualization of that potential. And obviously, it's easy to say that there was a lot of potential, but then how do you actually ensure that you've been able to tap properly and benefit from that? So if you look at, the next chapter, which actually looks at economy, which actually says, despite all of this buzz about the potential that the region has, and for the last 70 years, we are discussing this, Northeast region's contribution to the economy is still less than 3%. It's yield per hectare is only 1.5% of the entire country's food grain. And it's largely, very large, despite the fact that it's a very agro-based economy, it's very, very dependent on supplies from the rest of India. This is even the agro, I mean, despite the fact that almost every state has is agro-based economy. So of course, modern industry is something which has never been, much discussed. And there's, again, talk of potential, but in terms of actual implementation, except for oil and gas, which is natural resources, and we've seen several big companies like Indian Oil and ONGC doing work there, but that apart, there wasn't any scope. In fact, one of the recent reports that I have highlighted in my book is that again, while we are discussing Northeast, I think I must also mention that in many of the states, when I discuss Northeast, Assam is actually a caveat. Assam actually functions like, it's kind of ticks the box in almost every indicator, which is not true for Arunachal or Mizoram or Tripura or, every other state. So most of the report that I was talking about, which highlights about 181 large and medium scale industry in the region, 70% of which are in Assam. Which actually tells you then, that in terms of resources, that particular state obviously has so much more to offer. And so obviously a lot of concentration of the commerce is actually on that. Tea, of course, tea and bamboo again has played a large role in terms of the economic commerce. But again, if you look at the actual overall figures of India, they're very, very minuscule and they really don't make a dent in that sense. I also have argued in the book, and I'll just very briefly refer to here, that while there's lots of grandiose plans about big industries and all of that, I somehow believe that it's actually the small size firms which could finally probably go into medium scale enterprises actually has a possibility of providing not only it's providing for a larger number of people, it creates jobs, it creates products, is able to actually tap on the resources. So I somehow think that we should set aside those grandiose plans, look at small, small budget firms which could tap onto the agro and the high, the economy, which has been referring to all the time, and kind of work on that. That has been ignored because we are constantly looking at the big ticket formula here, the big ticket solution. We somehow missed the smaller offering that this region has. My third chapter, which is again the main buzz chapter here, is on the transport connectivity, and I won't get into the details here, but just to sum it up by saying that there's a huge number of projects underway. Road connectivity projects, airway connectivity projects, of course the coastal shipping, which linking it to Bay of Bengal is going to change the whole landscape, I would say, the commerce landscape. But for me, the most important element which has now been introduced to Northeast is the railway network. And I personally feel, though, of course, it's very hilly terrain, difficult. Every region in the Northeast is difficult to access, actually. And which is the reason why for so many long years that most of the states were inaccessible because there was no actual physical connectivity. But they've now been able to, in some sectors, railway linkages. But once, and I know it's a beginning, and I know it's going to take time because of the arduous climate as well as the terrain. But once I wouldn't say a full cobweb of railway network, but a semblance of railway network is put in place, this I think will be transformational for the Northeast, not only in terms of what it can access people, because people have remained isolated because how many can actually afford airport? I mean, flights. Again, though I think 21 new airports have been built because of weather conditions, I don't think more than 10 can ever be operational. These are very, very temperamental places. So, those are difficult. I mean, the roads, despite a huge thrust on roads, again, hugely high maintenance roads. So every time, and again, I'm one of those who keep traveling in the Northeast. Of course, this 1 year has been a different story altogether. We've seen that there's certain sections of road which are constantly being repaired because of the weather conditions being so difficult. So, there is a lot of thrust on the connectivity. And I think if the railways can come in more strongly, it would change not only the commerce, but also the people-to-people section. There's a chapter again on energy chapter here. And I know Sunil himself has done a lot of work on this, where he's trying to ensure there's a regional grid that is functioning so that Bangladesh, Nepal, India can all benefit that, which is under again BBI, and again that's one thing that Sunil has worked on again closely. And he was responsible for, I think, the first trial that ever took place on BBI, which started from Nepal. But I again caution here and say that while the Northeast, there is, potential again, but 70% of the energy that is produced is actually, consumed in the region itself, in the domestic sector. There is very little that you can actually think of. There's, grandiose plans of sending it to Myanmar, which is again energy deficit, and taking it. So these are fine only when you know that your own region has had enough. As I see it now, it doesn't have enough. We need to look at larger other issues. And more importantly, again, the whole discourse from the past, which is very focused on large hydro projects. And we know, and Amena here should probably speak about this also, I don't know, where we've seen how hydro projects, because we are at a higher riparian. So often hydro projects on particular rivers has immediate effect on the neighbors, which are lower riparian. And we've had differences over these. But I think the whole discourse from large hydro projects has moved now into building mini projects and mini grids. And I think this is something that we need to focus a lot more. Of course, in a different note completely, solar projects have done wonderfully well. But again, as you know, solar projects are limited. They can't service beyond a certain, space. But again, in the Northeast, we probably need to examine this. Again, of course, Tripura, I would say, again, is a caveat here, where it's done fabulously well in terms of having a bilateral role in terms of the thing it's been able to establish in Bangladesh. And again, we are discussing how, while India has very good energy trade with Bhutan, Nepal is in conversation with both Bangladesh and Bhutan. And I'm hoping that the grid will be built over, which obviously India has to support that grid, and they'll be able to take this forward. But as of now, I'm pretty cautious that while a regional grid can be put in place, but again, the ongoing domestic energy requirements, I think, is something that we need to examine and see. Once that is taken care of, the other issues can be dealt with. The next chapter, and I think that's something that Rishi referred to just now, which really is being placed right in the middle of the book. But I think a core chapter is the political chapter, where we've seen that how, political instability has torn this region apart. I think there are many, some of us student of this region, student of international politics, have constantly tried to identify, try to see how, we can take this forward. But the fact remains that Northeast is very sensitive. So any nuances within the political, frame tends to have a rippling effect. And, but of course, CA and RC is something that we've discussed enough, and we've seen even today how these are sensitive issues. Elections are on in Bengal and in Assam. We see how these are issues which are, kind of a touch me not now. We've had issues with Bangladesh over this. We've had issues with Nepal over this, for obvious reasons. So it is sensitive, and also within the region, it's very sensitive. And I would, I can address the issues later if somebody's question on it, but I would just say that in the Northeast, while we are planning so much of, transformational projects and development projects, we first need to examine the political stability, because without that, we can't take any of these plans forward. And I would actually say here that there is no substitute for good governance. We somehow tend to forget that in this jostling that we often, do that. Okay, there's so much of this, let's tap that. There's so much of that, let's tap that. Let's talk to one group and, take it away. It doesn't happen like that. We have to look at it in a far more, how would I say, with different layers. It's never a black and white story there. So, and I think we have to be very sensitive to this particular aspect. Let me, before I wrap up, focus on the two main chapters here. And I'm really so happy that Professor Amena is here to, because that actually looks at the cross-border linkages. And this whole Act East policy is about how Northeast can be a partner to the Act East, right? That's what we are discussing here. So the whole, I've mapped out this cobweb of transport linkages which you've developed both with Bangladesh, with Nepal, Bhutan, and of course Myanmar. And there is a lot of work that's going on, and I would say actually India and Bangladesh are probably leading the way to show how a bilateral program can be spread out into a regional framework. And I'm hoping that everything being okay, Nepal is of course always on board with all these programs that India is doing, but I think we are looking at BVIN going to be functional soon. So BVI, not only the Motor Vehicle Act, where we'll see a seamless kind of a movement take place between Bangladesh, Nepal, and India. Bhutan right now wants to stay out. They've cited some environmental and other reasons, but I'm sure those can be overcome later. But I'm hoping that the BVI will be able to be replicated into a larger space. And I think the BIMSTEC summit is going to be held in August in Colombo, and they're going to be discussing a master plan for connectivity. So BVI is going to dovetail into that master plan. And I'm very, very upbeat about it. Of course, a little word on the Myanmar, and in fact, a friend from Myanmar was supposed to also join the program, but for obvious reasons, there's been issues on connectivity and other things. While we did have a lot of projects, bilateral transport connectivity and projects with Myanmar, which are all work in progress, but this particular coup that has happened, there's obviously put a setback to many of these projects. And I think it's not probably a good time to discuss it right now. Which actually brings me to my most favorite section of the book, which is the last chapter, where I discuss that how do we ensure that when we are discussing Act East, we are discussing how the economies, the fastest two growing economies in Asia is India and Bangladesh. Of course, this is all pre-pandemic. Now the indicators and the numbers are all very different. But how these two, economies are going to work with the larger economies of extra-regional players. While this is all very true, and the urban, how will I say, the urban South Asia is moving ahead. But more importantly, and I think this is for many of you who know my work, who know what I focus on, knows that border is my bugbear. I keep saying this, and I'm so happy for that, all of you, and I'm happy that I could do this with IDEA, this conversation, that unless we involve the border population in part of a developmental drive, we will not be able to fully implement all those plans and projects that we have. It's not possible to isolate a certain section of the population. It's a large population, and border people are not limited and small. It's just that the middle kingdoms, I would say, the middle urban cities often tend to ignore the border population. But I'm saying, in fact, my main, I won't get into specifics now. Again, I hope all of you want to read the book, and I hope, but my point about these projects of Act East, of making Northeast relevant to this whole project, is that I don't need grandiose plans. I don't need big budget items. I'm quite sure, given the fact of the amount of possibility that the border region actually gives, that in very small incremental ways we can introduce changes through the borders, where again the border population on each side, whether it's Nepal India, whether it's Bhutan India, whether it's Bangladesh India, or Myanmar Northeast, there's a similarity in terms of not only the ethnic similarity in terms of language and food habits, but also in terms of how little services they get, whether in terms of public health, whether in terms of education. And my point is that while all these large projects are taking place, they'll all take time, because while the hardware is being done, the software also has to be, synced and to make it work. But if we are looking at border population, and border huts, 2 border huts in Meghalaya, 2 border huts in Tripura have shown you how exemplary developmental process. I mean, they're minimal because for obvious reasons they've been, the commerce exchange has been kept to a certain minimum. But the kind of commerce that's full flowing now, the kind of emotive connect that they've been able to, this book of course details out a lot in terms of how we'll be able to take that forward. But I'm really hopeful that beyond the large grandiose projects, that all of us are going to focus a lot more on the border population, who are so much part of all of us, and how we can take this. Because I truly believe that Act East will be truly successful when both urban and rural population both can be part of the journey. I'm going to end here on this note. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, ma'am, for your presentation. And and now before I invite Professor Amena Mohsin, first of all, you rightly pointed that how we should not see whole Northeast with the same features. Every state has a distinct distinct features, and how natural resources and tourism remain underexplored, and how Northeast cannot be looked stands its neighbors. While the strategic importance remains intact, more important than ever with the rise of Indo-Pacific and other sub-regional regionalism, geographical limitations need a specific attention. and how borders and border people who are an amalgamation of diverse ethnicities, cultures, lifestyle, livelihood, and so on remain at the heart of all developments that India intends to carry out in the region. So there is a lot on the platter for Professor Mohsin, Amena Mohsin, to discuss. Now, before I invite her, I would like to pose a few questions that you can answer after the presentation or now as you like. In your book and presentation, you mentioned that, and I quote, Northeast region is gradually and incrementally moving away from security-driven narrative towards a larger imperative for development, growth, progress, and prosperity. But when we look into data, region's contribution to national GDP is less than 3%. What has changed so far in those terms? And second, the unrest that we have witnessed after NRC and CAA implementation, or it was brought in, and the coup in Myanmar recently, does it allow India to move away from these security narratives? So now I would, ma'am, request Professor Mohsin to make a presentation as a book discussion. And before I ask her to come in, a few words about her. Professor Amena Mohsin teaches in the Department of International Relations, University of Dhaka. She graduated from the same department and later received her MA and PhD degrees from the University of Hawaii, USA, and Cambridge University, UK. Professor Mohsin has received several national and international fellowships, which include the East-West Center Graduate Fellowship, CEDA International Fellowship, Commonwealth Staff Fellowship, SSRC Fellowship, and Freedom Foundation Fellowship. She writes on rights, gender, minority, state, democracy, civil-military relations, border and human security issues. She is the author of The Politics of Nationalism, The Case of Chittagong Hill Tracts, Bangladesh, published in 1997. The Chittagong Hill Tracts, Bangladesh, On the Difficult Road to Peace, from Lynn Rayner Publishers in 2002. Ethnic Minorities of Bangladesh, Some Reflections from Sauntals and Rakhines from Program for Research on Poverty Elevation in 2002. Women and Militancy, South Asian Complexities, co-edited with Imtiaz Ahmed, published from Dhaka University Press in 2011. Conflict and Partisan with Dilawar Hussain from Sage in 2015. And Of the Nation Born, edited with Hamida Hussain from Zuban Publishers in 2016. So now I request Professor Mohsin to kindly start her presentation. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me, and thank you very much, Radha, for giving me this opportunity to review the book. And I must say that it was not only a pleasure, but in fact, it was a big learning experience for me as well. And you know, the book is so rich. I mean, I just can't say enough about it. And for the paucity of time, maybe I will be concentrating on a few major points that I took out from the books, which I thought that, you know, hit the chord. And as Rishi pointed out, that the book could not have been more timely than at this point of time, when not only we are faced with a global pandemic, but also the world is facing a new kind of a re-territorialization. At that juncture, when a book comes out which talks about connectivity, I think that is something to be really admired, to be looked at, and to be read very carefully. And I'm sure it would be a very good reading. I mean, as soon as it reaches the market, at least in Bangladesh, it would be a major reading for my students in international relations, because I think it is one of the first books which covers such a wide area. Not only on when you talk about Northeast, you don't only talk about Northeast, you touch the entire region. I mean, the South Asia, Southeast Asia. I mean, the entire canvas has been covered by the book. If I have to talk of the major, you know, what I found to be the major strengths of the book is the way you talk about the narratives. And narratives are very critical. Discourses are very critical because they are the key not only for the policymakers, but also how we imagine a community or a region to be. It's not only cognitive, it is also very spatial. So when I'm talking about the narratives, I mean, the way you have discussed it in your book and through your writings, I mean, you turn a periphery into a core. And I thought that that was one of the greatest contribution you have made to the region. Because as students of international relations, we have been studying about the Northeast, and for that matter, because I write on minority issues, as the periphery. But now we see that the periphery, the way it has been discussed, and rightfully it has been discussed so, that the periphery has been turned into a core. And I think there one sees a paradigm shift. And that is one of the major contributions of this book. And when we talk of creating, I'm talking of my department because we are all together in this journey. We are trying to build an indigenous knowledge, a local knowledge. And this is where the book makes a very important contribution, I would say. So, like the periphery, turning the periphery into the core, and then also you bring it's not only the turning of the periphery into the core, through that you also bring or you turn around the criticality of a region, that how it is important, like in India's quest, in its neighborhood first policy, in its move towards South Asia and Southeast Asia, how the Northeast is the key point. So the region, the criticality of the region also becomes very important. And definitely you have to, time and again, even during a presentation and even in the book, you go back and forth about that how it is important to contextualize it, to have it grounded, to have the people as the stakeholders. You bring out the governance issues very rightfully, that governance issues are important, and that Northeast is not just a region. I mean, it's an ethnic mosaic. So one has to look into the differentiations also. So when one talks about policies of connectivity and the involvement of the local people into it, one has to take differentiated approach. I mean, that is something that is important for the policymakers also, that one can't just look at it. There cannot be just one formula fit on, but there has to be a differentiated approach to the entire issue. So instead of a top down, it has to be a bottom up approach. And also what I found to be very important was that your long experience, as you pointed out in your presentation also, that you have been a frequent visitor to the Northeast. So that helped a lot. It's not that one is writing from Delhi, sitting in Delhi, but one who has visited the area and who is aware of the realities, the existing realities or ground realities of the area. So I thought that that was very important. These are the major strengths that I found in the book, and that's why I said that it. Like though I got the book through a friend, but I hope that this book would be available in Bangladesh, because it has to be one of the major readings. I was discussing about it with one of my very close friends, who you also happen to know. And he was telling me that how Bangladesh also needs to work on these areas. These are very critical areas for Bangladesh also. And I'm grateful to you that for having set the path, or having set the ball rolling. Then the second critical point for me, I mean, or for the audience over here, I would say that I am speaking from my location in Bangladesh. So one has to understand that. The connectivity issue is also very important for us also in Bangladesh. And there has been a lot of discussion going on this issue in Bangladesh. And you point out in your book that, you know, for India, India wants to connect with Southeast Asia, and ASEAN is one of its major anchor. So I guess there would be major point, not major, I would say some points of departure for Bangladesh in this context. It is true that we also want to cooperate with ASEAN very effectively, but maybe our, you know, like Middle East is also one of our anchor points, because given the, you know, the kind of economy that Bangladesh has, and migrant laborers, RMG sector. So these are different areas, you know, we'll be looking at the global level, and also because Bangladesh is a Muslim majority country. So I guess, you know, differences would exist, but definitely ASEAN with Indonesia, Malaysia being there, these are important areas of connectivity for Bangladesh also. You constantly talk about the infrastructure developments that is taking place, which are welcomed in Bangladesh, definitely. But I won't go into the details of it, but I'm sure more than me, you are aware of the caveats. And the questions are being, it's not only at the political level, but also if you go through the social media, also the electronic media, print media, constantly questions are being raised that how much of this infrastructure development going to benefit Bangladesh or not. And we still have the trade barriers, tariff barriers, para-tariff barriers, with which India being such a large economy, this is something, I mean, foreign policy, which our former foreign secretary Shahidul Haq was just mentioning the last week, that foreign policy is something which needs to be seen by the people. So I guess there is a gap there. I mean, India needs to be more sensitive about it, that whether people are seeing this or not. All these mega projects, I mean, you were talking about the mega dams, the hydro projects, and Bangladesh being the lower riparian country has been at the receiving end. There are major problems, I would say, like when, like BIMSTEC, BBIN. When it comes to BIMSTEC, questions have been raised about the viability and sustainability of BIMSTEC, and the constant questions which are being raised is that India's role. Since you do talk about Myanmar, and this is something very sensitive, and I can't, and being located in Bangladesh, I just can't not talk about it. The Rohingya issue comes in, the Kaladan project, the Sitwe port. In your writing itself, you talk about resources in the Rakhine project. And we in Bangladesh are fully cognizant of the fact that people have been evicted from the Rakhine, more specifically northern Rakhine region, to build up all these projects and build up special economic zones, to go on for oil exploration, gas exploration at the cost of the Rohingya population. The question is that Bangladesh is today hosting 1.1 million Rohingyas in Bangladesh. And when we talk about that's why I'm bringing in the connectivity issue. I mean, one can't talk about connectivity only in terms of infrastructure. And the questions are being constantly raised in Bangladesh that when India talks about neighborhood first. So, you know, given India's role on the Rohingya crisis, Bangladesh had really expected that being a non-permanent member of the Security Council, India would play a proactive role on the Rohingya crisis, but instead we found that India abstained from voting on the Rohingya issue. So these are issues, I mean, since you are from international relations, and I know that you have a chapter on the political side of it. So, you know, connectivity for us, for Bangladesh particularly, SAARC is also very important because after all, Bangladesh mooted the idea of SAARC. So if the moment you talk to Ambassador Farooq Soban, Ambassador Shamsher Mobin, Chaudhry, they would always ask, raise this issue that have you buried SAARC? What has happened to SAARC? But I can understand this is when this is about Southeast Asia, Act East policy. But for Bangladesh, I think the priorities would be also SAARC. We wouldn't, we just can't think that, these can be complementary, but not substitute for other organizations. So connectivity, we have issues with connectivity, and I think the Rohingya issue, and also is the way, economists would keep on raising these questions about how much Bangladesh is benefiting from the connectivity. But by no way I'm undermining the connectivity issue. But all I'm saying is that somehow in India, we have, we are finding that too much thrust is being given on the infrastructure side of it, on development, economic development. But there are governance issues, there are issues of democracy, there are issues of rights issues are involved. These are all issues that I think Indian policymakers would have to take into cognizance when they talk about connectivity. The third most important point for me was the borders, the way you have defined borders and, the connectivity. I think that is very critical for me. For Bangladesh, we have seen, which you mentioned in your writing also, like borders are, it brings not only the political history of the region, but also the social history of the region. And as a Bangladeshi, for me, not only 47 is important, partition, but 71. 71 is also very important. And then for like the people in the Chittagong Hill Tracts, the construction of the Kaptai Dam in the 60s, which turned, about 40,000 people into refugees, and they took refuge in the northeastern region of India. So, borders are also and then now the Rohingyas, they are taking refuge in the bordering areas of Bangladesh. So borders, I would say that these are not only dividing lines, but also connecting lines where refugees, because, these are safe havens for refugees, not only for insurgents, but also for refugees. So these are areas, when South Asia is a region. So these are, how you talk about reimagining the border. I think that is very critical, that we need to reimagine the border, that borders not only divide, but borders also connect. And the cross border region-based integration, which is very important. But again, if you look, I'm sure you have looked into the writings of Willem Schendel on borderland, then Sanjay Chaturvedi on borders. And this is very close to my heart also, because we as students were tutored into borders as security zones, we looked at border through a security lens. But now we find that borders are connecting zones. And this you bring out very, very nicely or very aptly in your book and in your writing, and how we can reimagine the border. And the border trade, border heart. There again, I would refer to the issue as a Bangladeshi, the border killing issue. It has been, I think, one major thorn or a bone of contention between Bangladesh and India. And the recent statement by the Indian foreign minister, as well as after the recent visit of the Indian Prime Minister, there were reactions from Bangladesh when border killings were associated no crime, no killing. And to associate that if once the economy develops, once border hearts are there, the killings would stop. I mean, these just can't be accepted as arguments. I mean, this has to stop. And when we talk about the conception of border does not even exist among the border people. And over there, it is. I was quite amazed to find that they were talking about that when something happens, we go amra opare chole jai, means we go to the other side. And when I asked them what is that other side, they pointed out that the other side is India. You know, for them, the border does not even exist. That line does not exist. And they said, opar epar. And this is true. If you have traveled extensively, even in Bangladesh, if you travel not only through the northern region, but also through Kumilla, I mean, there are many houses where, whose kitchen or their washrooms are on the other side of the border. So they always talk about epar opar. And which I find that, it's a very beautiful way of looking at the borders. And I think we have a lot to learn from the borderland people. And as you rightly pointed out, that instead of a top-down approach, it has to be a bottom-up approach. And we have to factor in the major stakeholders. And I think this book would go a long way in paving the way for regional cooperation and paving the way for connectivity. And as a Bangladeshi, I would only like to flag in the political issues or the issues that they stand as stumbling blocks at the moment. But in this pandemic period, I think the governance issues, the rights issues, and this vaccine diplomacy, I mean, this also has to stop. So all these factors, I mean, of course, these are not areas of your book, but I'm saying this, that all these would go a long way in building a very stable global system. Thank you very much. Thank you and congratulations, Radha.
Thank you, Professor Mohsin. And I think she has left a lot for Dr. Sreeradha Datta to discuss. So now before I open the floor for Q&A, I invite Dr. Sreeradha Datta ma'am to lead from what Professor Mohsin has conveyed and discussed about.
Thanks. I mean, I know it's been an effort to read the book middle of all the other commitments that you have, but you're right. I'm just happy to start this conversation in terms of reimagining the borders, in terms of changing the narrative and the discourse. We've been so caught up, and I'm not saying that security is not priority. It's for all of us. I mean, that is core concern. But today we live in a neighborhood where I'm hoping that, each one understands the core concern, addresses it, so we can put that aside. And then, look at the other connects. And of course, I mean, in my writings, I've constantly talked about, I think I got into big trouble when Bangladesh newspaper put me on the front page where I said that I apologize on behalf of everybody about the border killing, which is true. I mean, the argument here has been that our border security forces are not using lethal tools anymore, which is why the smugglers have actually now started using far lethal things. So the point is that there has to be a collaboration both, and I don't know how border huts can replicate that. Border killings are happening because of the illegal, content. We know about a lot of illegal factories, which are also on both sides of the border, and all the other, even human trafficking also takes place apart from the cows and the other things. So these are far deeper issues that I think the establishment is aware of. But I find it strange that despite that, and I've said this very openly, and then I can see Gentle Chopra and some others who are very close to the establishment who would, understand this, that despite the conversation we keep saying the security forces are doing 70 years, and we've still, or 50 years, let's say, that we've not been able to come to a positive conclusion. And I think it's completely an anathema to all the other good things that we are doing. So, while that kind of digresses from the main thing, but again, if you have this kind of pinpricks and, the whole citizen identity issues, the kind of adjectives that has been used about a neighborhood. And I mean, it's not something that we as students of politics are happy to see, because that all the good work somehow, unravels with that. And I do understand. But again, as I said, that I'm very happy to hear your words and your encouragement. And I really believe that we need this positive conversation to flow, where I sincerely believe that while the urban locations of South Asia will move ahead, there is a lot of progress taking place at various sectors. But again, coming back to the point that Rishi had said earlier in the during the thing, that yes, the narrative has moved from security to, earlier on, it was very, very security forces who had a kind of a priority. And again, I hope General Chopra will come in here because he knows the sector well, that they've had, I mean, I would say that they've actually held complete control and reign over it. It's only subsequently when, stability was possible by a number of concessions and other measures and mechanisms, that we were able to move. And I'm not saying it's over and done with. We still have the mother of all insurgent movement still on. There is a kind of a ceasefire agreement and conversation on, but it's not as if we've been able to put a lid on it. But fortunately for most of it, I mean, if you look at Sikkim, it's a faraway corner, but it's actually, in terms of its own economic indicators, it's done very well. It's one of a huge tourism attraction. A lot of Bangladeshi friends are coming there, Nepali friends are coming there. So, there's a lot of other positive stories which are also happening. And thankfully, as I said, that, in whether I'm discussing Tripura or I'm discussing Manipur and Mizoram, the trajectory has been one of a developmental narrative. I'm not saying that it's all done as yet. There are still issues much on the ground that we need to address. But yes, it's not anymore the complete domain of the security establishment. I think even others, the commerce industry is playing a huge role. The tourism industry is playing a huge role. So these are, and there's a lot of, as stakeholders who are part of the conversation now. And again, for the first one, I don't know whether I remember saying this when I was presenting, that after many years, we see state governments in the Northeast working very closely with the central government in Northeast. For very long, for the first 40 years, I would say they were often at cross purposes. Right now, there is that kind of a thing, that is coming. I can see a lot of friends here on the, who we might, and I think I would like to recognize Ambassador Shamsher Mobin Chaudhary, who's been a foreign secretary and also, understands the closely. Of course, General Chopra, I'll come back to the questions again, but thanks, Amena, a lot for all these, the various points. And as I said, this is a conversation starter, and I hope that, again, all of us will work together and push these issues which are core interest to us. And I think that's where the point is, that all of us here, and I include Sunil in this conversation, that we are all very people-centric. We believe that without involvement of larger stakeholders, you can't have a top-down approach. Nothing can be successful unless it comes right through the bottom. And I think that's the core, I would say, mainstay of my argument in this.
So thank you, ma'am. And now I open the floor for question and answers. And before that, if Ambassador Chaudhary or General Chopra would like to intervene, they're very welcome to this. So thank you.
Major takes the major decisions, generals take on the general decisions, but I yield the floor to General Chopra. More importantly, he's a fellow freedom fighter. I retired as a major, but he wanted to become a general. So General Chopra, I'd like to hear your points of view, and then maybe I'd put in my 2 cents worth. Thank you.
Sir, please unmute yourself.
Yeah. Okay, can you hear me? Can you hear me now?
Yeah, yes, we can, please.
The first point somebody said about the security forces on the border. You see, it's not so much the central forces of Bangladesh or India that have to take charge. It's the local forces on both sides of the border who have more responsibility, who know the bad hats. And as far as insurgency is concerned, thanks to the cooperation of Bangladesh, most of the top insurgents are in the bag. So it's not that it's an unsurmountable problem. If the other departments come into the picture, certainly the security forces on both sides can handle it. 2, yes, Mr. Foreign Secretary, yes, it was my proud privilege. I was posted in Bhutan But I joined Bangladesh for its war on liberation, but I could not sit in Bhutan. By the way, this is the third of my 4 wars that I fought. I think I'm the only living general who's fought 4 wars. Anyway, Radha, what an interesting approach you've given us. I just want to raise 2 quick questions. One, I think the lady, the speaker from Madam Mohsin talked a little about water. See, water is our bane. Now, if China, and incidentally, nobody's even uttered the word China once in this 1.5 hours. So at the end, somebody can also tell me that what role does China have to play in this? Anyway, that's subsidiary. Water. Now, with all this happening on Yarlong Sangpo, we are upper riparians, also middle riparians. My viewpoint is that by ourselves, we have an agreement with China by giving us data and so, but they don't give it to us. If India, Bangladesh, Nepal, Bhutan get together, we did it with Pakistan in 1960. Maybe we can approach China to do some kind of a, not an Indus water treaty, but some kind of a treaty or something to put a little pressure on them. That's my point number 1. Number 2, rather, I'd like you to talk a little more about the Northeast, Bangladesh, Myanmar for us are gateways to the Indo-Pacific. And Indo-Pacific is no longer only security, it's all about economy, connectivity, trade, and so on. So you could throw some light on that and this China factor that I said. Thank you.
Thank you for inviting me, and congratulations to Dr. Sreeradha Datta for yet another book, which I haven't yet had the privilege to read. But as someone once said, that I never read a book till I have reviewed it. So I'm waiting to lay my hands on the book. Of course, Amena Mohsin has covered a whole range of issues here. Now, connectivity is a very historical phenomenon. And as you know, civilizations have been built on being able to connect more as far as they could go. And the famous saying that all roads lead to Rome, it's actually true. It's not just saying, because I have lived and worked in Rome for 4 years. And the Roman civilization, part of it was to connect to the outside world. That, of course, had a totally military and colonial or occupational aspect to it. The more we connect in Southeast Asia, South Asia, I think the better off we are. But as Amena said, that connectivity is not just about physical infrastructures. It has to connect the people, in the sense that people has to have direct benefit from connectivity. And I'm sure that this follows. I mean, as long as you have connectivity, people do tend to benefit, because trade improves, as people-to-people connectivity, movement improves. Everything goes along with it. The second issue I wanted to say is that I'm trying to understand Amena Mohsin's point about reimagining the borders. I mean, is she trying to find a definition for the borders, or what? I wasn't quite clear, because borders exist. So what is there to reimagine about them? They have been there, they are there, they will be there. So if she could clarify on that. I'm sure everybody has, most of you would have read a very recent, brilliantly written, very brutally honest analysis by Dr. Bilahari Vasikan of Singapore, who was a Singapore foreign minister. And he was one of those who was known as Singapore's undiplomatic diplomat because of his candor. And he has touched deeply on the problems of ASEAN, especially relating to Myanmar's status in the ASEAN. I have always felt, I've worked in Vietnam and I've worked in China as well. And I've always felt that ASEAN of 6 was stronger than, or at least more cohesive than ASEAN of 10. And that is why ASEAN has today, what ASEAN has is a lot of activity, but no action. Or rather, the activities do not match their actions. They talk a lot, they have telephones, especially after the military coup in Myanmar, which I think is outrightly condemnable. Not that the end of the military coup would mean any good news for the Rohingyas. They will still remain a marginalized, unwanted lot. So I think it's important to understand that from a Bangladesh perspective, we are more than keen to link up with Southeast Asia, and we are willing to, and I've said this many times before, that I think India and Bangladesh can work hand in hand in moving into the ASEAN region and beyond. And yes, one of course has to keep an eye on what China is doing, what are China's plans, what kind of long-term China, as you know, never thinks 5 years ahead, they think 500 years ahead. So one has to keep that in mind. Now, General Chopra, very nice to see you, sir. And you really must be the only surviving general to have fought not 1 but 4 wars. And that says a lot about your capability, capacity, and your bravery. You touched on a very, very pertinent issue, that is water. Now, wars have been fought on water. We go back to the Renaissance period of Italy, the different regions and kingdoms that they had, the Venetians and the Imola regions, they had wars, you know, about the sharing of the waters of common rivers. And we tend to look away from the good practices that exist on dealing with waters of common rivers. Look at the Rhine River, for example, or the Danube, for example. I was ambassador in Germany, and I was amazed by the success of the Rhine Commission in able to find an amicable solution that neither Netherlands nor Germany can complain about. In fact, both of them are very happy about it. Equally, the same is the case with the Danube River, which connects Germany, Hungary, Austria. No problem. More than 100 rivers flow between the US, Canada, Mexico. On each and every one of them, they have an arrangement that works. These are the good practices. Now, coming closer to neighborhood, our neighborhood. Let us look at the Mekong. How Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos has worked out arrangement that benefits everybody. Now, yes, depending on the demands of the respective countries, the water sharing or water management. I use the word management more than water sharing, because it is important to be able to manage. And I think the new approach of a basin wide solution makes more sense. And the 6 rivers that are now under discussion of the researched Joint Rivers Commission at the secretary's level, hopefully going up to the ministerial level, where 6 rivers will be discussed, 2 of them which go through my district, Kwai and Mono. We hope that we will find something there. Tista is a very, very bitter pill that we are all stuck with. It is stuck in our tongue. Right? We can neither swallow it nor we can throw it out. It is out there. And the center in Delhi and the state government in West Bengal, the way things are going out now with the elections, the rhetorics and the huge, I mean, literally short of fist fights going on in West Bengal right now. I do not see, even if a BJP government were to be formed in Bengal after May 2nd, whether they would be in a better position to do so. I always thought that if there's a political will, it can be done. And I think the resolution of the land boundary agreement is a classic case in point. It took India 40 years to be able to deliver on their part of the LBA, which was signed no less than by Prime Minister Sheikh Mujibur Rahman from Bangladesh side and Prime Minister Indira Gandhi from the Indian side. And Bangladesh delivered on it within a year. It took India 40 years to be able to come to that. There might have been complexities, but its implementation shows that if there's a will, there is a way. Of course, we have to, now, the latest that I read in the Indian media, concerns about China building a dam, you know, which will affect the flow of water into India and subsequently and consequently, of course, also into Bangladesh. So there is need for a multinational or multi-state approach to the issue of common rivers. You know, just because the river flows through China or starts in China doesn't mean it's a Chinese river. Similarly, just because a majority or a big portion of a water of, say, Tista or Ganges or Dhorla flows through India doesn't make it necessarily an Indian river. You know, Persian Gulf doesn't mean it belongs to Persia only. Everybody shares Persian Gulf. So one has to really put one's mind to it and find acceptable solutions, which I think can be found on how we managed it. What is Bangladesh is a very much an irrigation dependent country, agriculture dependent country, as it is in the case of India. So we have to be able to look into it seriously. Coming to the issue of the very sensitive issue of border killing, there are different names have been given to it at different times. Recently, I heard a retired Indian diplomat who also happened to have served in Bangladesh. We apparently don't use the word innocent Bangladeshis anymore. I don't think we have moved away from that. Just last week, a man somewhere in the Russia area, I think, went across the border to see his, I think, great-grandfather or grandfather who lives on the Indian side. While returning, he was shot by the BSF. He was not a smuggler. There was no question of him carrying cattle across from India to Bangladesh. He had just gone for a visit, and in the evening, while he was returning, he was shot. His body was lying on the border. The BSF eventually went. Thank God he didn't die. He survived. He was being able to take him to a hospital. Now, when I was in the army and serving in Jessore in 1960s, I had literally walked the entire borderline Jessore and Kushtia area. That was part of our job. We used to call the BOPs, border outposts, and we were supposed to inspect border outposts. If you look at the figures of the first 23 years of Pakistan, Bangladesh being part of East Pakistan, how many border killings were there? But after the independence of Bangladesh, the border killings have started. So when we were an enemy country, there were no border killings. And now that we are friends, almost like allies, we have border killings. Do you have border killings with Nepal? I'm sure smuggling is going across the India-Nepal border as well. Now, I, as High Commissioner in Sri Lanka, I know of many instances where Sri Lankan fishermen would come across in the Park Strait, across the Indian territory into the Indian water area. They would not be shot. They would be arrested. The boats would be brought ashore, and after negotiation, they would be sent back to Sri Lanka. Similarly, Indian fishermen would cross across to the Indian Sri Lankan side of the Park Strait. They would be arrested and they'd be sent back. Yes, there is need for a very, very serious look into it. I don't think everybody is totally innocent here. If you take a look, and you'll find, why is there no border killing, say, between Chittagong and the Sylhet area, the entire border region, boundary area there? There is no border killing there. Most of the border killings are taking place along the Rajshahi and Satkhira and that kind of area. So is cattle smuggling happening only in the western borders or nothing in the eastern border? I do not know. I don't have the answers for that. So I think instead of saying that, look, no crime, no deaths, which didn't go down very well in Bangladesh, I can tell you frankly, this comment. If there is crime, there is a way to deal with crime. If there's a crime in the streets of Bombay, you just don't go and shoot that guy. You arrest that guy first. So this is something very sensitive. All the good things that are happening in terms of connectivity, people-to-people relationships, cultural exchanges, the very remarkable vaccine diplomacy, for example. It has been wonderful. And why the relationship that started being written in blood in 1971, when we could share blood in 1971, why can't we today share water 50 years down the road? I thank you very much.
Thank you, sir. Now over to Sreeradha ma'am.
These are many issues. I'm not sure where to begin, and I'm completely agreeable that why should these, even today we are grappling with border killings. But I mean, as I said, I can only say and I can write and I can speak, but somebody else has to bring the solution to the table. And there's been, we know the border security forces on both sides periodically meet, and it's not a new phenomena. It's been happening through years. There's obviously a nexus working there, and I mean, let's face it. But again, as I said, even smugglers, criminals can be dealt with differently. We've often heard on the Rajshahi side there that, the terrain is difficult, there are long grasses. But, in today's world, I find it difficult to believe. And I do understand the sentimentality and the issues that Bangladesh has about this. And I don't think, this is something also I want to say here, and it probably just points to the insensitivity on our side, that whenever I track Indian newspapers, the local newspapers, there isn't many times the references to these killings. Well, on the Bangladesh side, pretty periodically you'll find a reference to what has happened, because our side of the media is often, and again, the killings are all, at times Indian nationals, at times Bangladeshi nationals. So it's not that we understand when that's happening, which particular national it is. And it really is the most unfortunate ongoing situation that has, again, between two neighbors who give blood for each other. I don't know why this should continue, and there's obviously a crazy nexus which I'm not able to follow. Coming back to water, which I think is far more complicated, and I'm completely agreeable with Ambassador Shamsher about how that we need to look at management of water. We, sharing cusecs, water flow during dry seasons, these are not issues anymore. We really, India is surrounded by, other economies which are agro-based. I think it's time, and between friendly neighbors, India is friendly with Nepal, with Bhutan, with Bangladesh. There is no reason why we can't, engage on the sharing, the cropping pattern, to see that what time of the year that you need more intensive water output, and what time that what is the other particular product that we can share. And I think the conversation has to move away from the dry season and cusecs, because I don't think even today, even on Tista, for argument's sake, there is no data available, because for the last 20 years, no. So while, completely agreeing to with what Amena said and what Ambassador Chaudhary said, that we do agree that the discourse on the water has to change. We can't be discussing flows, and I don't want to get into, this is a very sensitive time. I don't want to discuss state center politics, which all of us are following, and we know how terribly outlandish situation at this point of time. But what I wanted to actually talk about, the point that General Chopra raised about having a conversation with China. And while despite severe hostility and differences that India, can we do the same with China? And here I'm going to again, come back to Professor Shamsher, Ambassador Shamsher, that I'm not sure. And I think the point that General Chopra was saying, that can we kind of build a consortium, all of us riparian, kind of appeal to China. But I'm not terribly convinced. And here I would actually have to say Bangladesh and China far greater friends. I mean, if anybody has a leeway in South Asia with China, I'd probably come to you first. But what we've seen during the last few months of hostility that's happened in the northern side of India, I don't think China's going to listen to any one of us. Even in the best of times, even when we didn't face this kind of hostility, we've seen even during that time when we have talked about dams and all that, that there was very little, conversation that we could actually do with China. To my Bangladeshi friends here to say that, is it possible to say when things were not so hostile, there hasn't been any forward movement. There are experts at saying something and saying nothing, and which we've seen, whether it's on the borders, whereas on the several other issues that we have outstanding issues with China, they only tend to move and they are going to benefit out of this. But being the upper riparian, being the, where they are, and risen power now, they're not rising anymore. But very well, I don't know whether it's possible that at the region we kind of take the conversation. And I'm going to close in here before anybody else about the point that Amena made about SARC. I completely believe that in South Asia, SARC is the core organization. All other sub-regional, which is again BBN is part of SARC, BIMSTEC again is a sub-regional organization. But if I, as a country of South Asia, had to belong, I would say SARC is core. But we've seen differences, as I'm saying, if security understanding has to be the core to any collaborative project, and Pakistan has hit us at all times, irrespective of any conversation. And this is not to say that our previous prime minister didn't try, and even Prime Minister Modi tried. He did lots of out-of-the-box stuff, which he never does with anybody else, actually. he took that extra effort with, given that, of course, we've seen a conversation where Prime Minister Khan has said that they were going to, want to engage with us. And I think somebody's inviting us all together. That's fine. But do they ever keep their promises? I mean, whenever something good happens, they also, hit back immediately and the whole thing. So I'm just saying that I think India and all of us are very much happy to be part of the SARC process. But you saw it even during pandemic when Prime Minister Modi called for a meeting, everybody came on board. Pakistan did not. I mean, they refused to be part of this, pandemic aid and development fund or whatever they were doing. So these are difficult situations, and I don't know how to overcome that. But again, I would say that coming back to think that there are difficulties, but again, the point here is that if all of us, and some of us, I'm not sure that all of us, again for SARC, and that's another point I want to say, that for SARC, Afghanistan needs what Afghanistan. So, I truly believe that we have to examine this whole collaboration through sub-regional approach, because it's impossible to have 7 or 8 of us. And I say the same for BIMSTEC. I mean, I'm a huge propounder for BIMSTEC in terms, and I think the point again, I'm coming back to General Chopra. General Chopra did talk about how Indo-Pacific was assuming greater salience in today's, this whole outreach that we do with Southeast Asian economies and the presence that we do. And I think India is constantly wanting to assert its space in the littoral waters is very, very critical to larger role that it wants to play in the international community. And here again, Northeast, I think, plays a great role here. So there's no way that India is not going to, succeed that way. So there has to be, that kind of, I think, greater recognition of the space that Northeast and its surrounding littoral waters give. So we will focus on that a lot more in the times to come as we see it unfolding, whether through Quad or the other. And IORA is, of course, somehow fallen on marginal wayside. But again, I think as a collaborative, I think all of us somehow get subsumed in the politics of it, because we often speak more and not able to implement. So if we could able to, and I was really happy if I can sign in BIMSTEC, we see the master plan being signed, the connectivity. And at the point that I think Ambassador Shamsher began with, that connectivity is actually going to connect us through a commerce. And for the younger generation who's not so enthused with the emotive issues that we South Asians feel about each other, if the economic and the commerce can actually appeal to the younger generation, I think we would have taken the relationship to another level. I mean, I don't expect the same generation of freedom fighters to feel about the region, 20-year-old or the first time voter in our country. They look at the whole South Asian through a different prism. They're always looking at, bettering themselves. The emotive content doesn't hold them back. For us, and I think a point that somebody else did, and I was talking about South Asia, again, somebody who I work very closely has fought many wars, about how offers came from the US to me and other things. I said, because of the emotive content for me was important. I mean, I get something going back to the same old dusty roads of Bangladesh. There's something that appeals inside me, but I don't think the generation that follows us will feel that emotive content. So we will have how we can actually draw them into a much larger homogenized space through a different landscape. We can't have that, the cultural, the soft connect. I mean, I don't believe that's the only way forward. There are certain sectors of it. We all love music. I think South Asia, every youth loves music. But again, I mean, there's a limitation to that. So we will have to look at far more core, hardcore issues that appeal to all one. And again, a conversation becomes easier when you're on a more easy platform. The more we have differences, and I think we'll have to again, and I know again, Amena knows this, that I constantly talk about the fact that, while the leaders of the governments have a conversation going, we seem to be believing that the people are not part of the conversation. And public perception is critical to foreign policy. And if we are not able to absorb and internalize that and take that forward, I'm sorry to say, much of our things will, kind of isolate themselves as rhetorics and sloganery. And I don't think all of us who are working so hard to ensure that we have a level playing field for all of us together is something that we are very closely working on. But again, as I said, policymakers, of course, have, they know different ways. I mean, that's a different mechanism that they have. And often I've been told that you haven't seen the file, and I'm sure Amina has been told that we belong to academic world where we probably don't have access to some information, but that's no excuse for not working. And I'm saying, if you know Bangladesh in a particular auditorium where the Chinese local councillor, he got up, it's a different conversation completely, but he got up and said, yes, I understand that we have a huge trade deficit with Bangladesh and we are addressing it. We are looking at what are the mechanisms we can bring in place. This was in the early 90s. In fact that they actually talked about it, said it's right in the open that, okay, let's look at mechanisms. We in India don't want to do that. We don't want to go up and say straight that, yes, we have a deficit with you, guys, okay, let's see how this. So, the point that you talked about non-tariff barriers, of course, we've reduced that, really reduced it, and there are very few items there. But again, I'm saying between friends, why are we holding back few things? I mean, there are possibility where amongst friends, conversation, we don't have to do a match to match. And of course, the other point that you talked about, that Bangladesh has interest in West Asia and other parts of the world, which is absolutely true. But I think recently, in the recent visit, we've also seen how India mind that highway that we are saying that they also want direct access through India to the Southeast Asian economies, and I think that's something we need to, of course, as I said, given the coup, difficult circumstances, but it's going to be over someday, and I'm hoping there'll be a far more reform system in place in Myanmar at that point of time. And then, of course, Bangladesh should be, and also certainly join India in these whatever cross-border initiatives that we are doing across economies, not only in South Asia, but across the region in Southeast Asia. And I think that's the way to go. I mean, irrespective of political differences, let's focus on the positives. Let's see what, and again, coming back to the point of connectivity, we do understand, I certainly try and highlight that often, that for Bangladesh, they don't see the benefit starts once they kind of, other in terms of taxes and other things, they beneficially, they will see the benefit of working together. And again, we can never do a same to same, match to match. It's difficult when we are discussing different entities. There are plenty of questions unanswered, but I guess it's just one particular interaction. I'm not sure I can really do justice to every query that came my way. Thank you again.
Okay. Now I request Professor Mohsin. I think Mr. Chaudhary has also something to say, but on a hold, Professor Mohsin, you go, please.
Thank you. Actually, reimagining borders. I mean, this is something Radha has used in her book as well. And there is a whole discourse around it. When we talk of borders, borderlands, Sanjay Chaturvedi, Willem van Schendel, they have written extensively on this entire concept of borders and borderlands. And when I talk about reimagining borderland, it is like, instead of looking at borders as areas which divide people, I understand that border is a marker of your sovereignty, or your territoriality. That is fine, but at another level, it can also be a point where it connects people. And like we are talking about border hearts. So if it can connect people, it has the potential of connecting people, but our previous experiences have not been too good. I'm also aware of that. So we are hoping that in future it would be better. So if people can really come together, because I don't know if you heard when I was talking about, like epare gelam, opare gelam, when people talk about borders like this side, that side. The concept of border, simply, when I was talking to this Garo lady, I was surprised to see that she didn't even have the concept of border. And Radha is a frequent visitor to Bangladesh, and this is at a very personal level I'm talking of. She has met this girl at my place, who hails from that region, and she doesn't even have that concept of border. And she kept on telling me that how people from India cross over with the goods, like they get soaps and other things from India. And then, like they take food in their place. And it's a barter, it's like a barter system. I mean, the cash economy does not exist in those areas. That's why I'm saying that, you can reimagine the border. Radha talks in her book about the barter system also. The problems in, with finance, it's very difficult. That's why you have this hundi system where all this money is going out unaccounted for. But if in the Pacific Islands, they still have the barter system going on. So if in the border areas, we can reintroduce this system, and like the borders can be open. If you can have a common education system or hospitals, like these are, you can reimagine the border as a place of coexistence. This is something also I want to mention, that I'm quite curious. We have so many border killings in Bangladesh, India borders. But if you look at Wagah border, your border with Pakistan, Wagah border, the way the flag, it comes down, you really have a ceremony over there. I mean, this should have been there on this side of the border. But we don't see this kind of ceremony on this side of the border. But on the Punjab border, if you look, they have this full-fledged ceremony when the Indian border, Indian flag and the Pakistan flags comes down. They shout at each other, but it's like, just like mocking at each other. And people come there, they come to watch that, whatever you call it. I mean, Ambassador Shamsher would know it better than me. When the flag is taken down at sunset, that ceremony, it is something to be seen. And I see that as a way of connecting people, where two sides of the people, they wave at each other. I've often seen families coming together and waving at each other. So we have families living across borders. Only again, I'm personalizing it, but like we had a book publication on May 71. And one of my colleagues wrote that she, when her father was picked up by the Pakistan army, she went and lived with her maternal parents at Chikatoli in Dhaka. And Radha wrote back to me that Chikatoli is also her, grandparents' place. They used to live there. So people are connected in very intimate ways. And so that's why I'm saying that we have social histories. So why do we always harp on the cultural, on the political histories? Why can't we work on the social histories and bring people together? And if you look at the refugee, I mean, I pointed out that South Asia is a region which not only produces refugees, but also receives refugees. And borders have been areas where refugees have found their safe havens. So instead of just looking at it from the security angle, we can also look at it from a very humanitarian perspective. So I was trying to bring in that discourse, which Radha has talked of in her book. That's why I say that we can reimagine the border. Already when you talk of Northeast as a gateway to connectivity, you are reimagining the borderland and the border areas. Thank you, that's all.
Mr. Chaudhary?
I'm going to throw a question to the audience. At the very recent events in Bangladesh, celebrating the centenary of Father of the Nation, Bangabandhu, and the 50th anniversary of the independence of Bangladesh, and also the 50th anniversary of Bangladesh-India relations. I think Bangladesh Prime Minister Sheikh Hasina threw up a very, I would say, forward-looking idea and in a not so veiled message. Now, in the presence of the Prime Minister of Bhutan, she said that she called upon all South Asian leaders to work politicians, not leaders, politicians, to work hand in hand to build a prosperous and peaceful South Asia. She went a step higher on the 26th of March in the presence of Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi, where she actually said, and I'm quoting verbatim from her speech, she said, let us all take a pledge, all, to forget the divisions and work for the development of the people and establish a prosperous South Asia. She did not talk of a sub-regional South Asia. She talked of South Asia as we know it. And then she also gave India that role. She called on India as the largest country in the region to play a leading role in building a stable and politically and economically vibrant South Asia. So do you think the Prime Minister of Bangladesh was really coming up? And mind you, at that very event on 26th of March, at the very last moment, it was not in the original program, the message of Pakistan Prime Minister Imran Khan was also telecast live in the presence of the Prime Minister of India. It was not in the original program, it was a last minute thought. So was Bangladesh Prime Minister saying that, look, we have had enough discord, we will have enough discord, but let us now try to look forward. She did not use the word SARC here, she used the word SARC in the 17th December virtual discussion with Prime Minister Modi on health cooperation. But I thought that the Prime Minister of Bangladesh was really taking a very positive and forward-looking message she was sending to all South Asian leaders. And I leave it to the audience to have it just as a food for thought. Thank you.
I think the discord is about SARC than we think about South Asia, because you remember there was a South Asian SARC satellite and eventually it became South Asian satellite. So what we are intending is a cooperation, but what comes in between. Ma'am, over to you. You want to say something? Yeah.
Rishi, I just wanted to add to what Amena said, that exactly what happens at the Wagah border, at Akhara and Agartala border, they've started this similar thing where they have the flags in the morning, and in the evening there's a beautiful ceremony. In fact, I was lucky that the first day of the ceremony I was actually there and they invited me to be there. So that's something which is they've started, and we saw a lot of population on both sides come with food dabba, and you know, like there's an exchange of population there. They're allowed to, there's a common area where they're allowed to come. There's a kind of seating arrangement done for them. There's a beautiful music which is played. So they've actually been able to replicate this on this particular sector, which is a beautiful experience.
Okay, I can see Abu Yusuf, who is also a senior and senior fellow at the IISSR in Bangladesh, if he would like to say something. And there is a question on the panel by Yusuf. Would you like to say something? Yeah?
Thank you, Rishi. And congratulations to Sreeradha for your very good writing. Though I didn't read the book, but I have read your writings earlier. And after the discussion, I think it would be a very nice book to read. I just have a question on the issue of India's, as you have mentioned about BIMSTEC as well as BBI and the regional organizations. But at the same time, we have to, we can see that India is the largest country in the region, and India's role in this respect is very important. Having said that, if I say considering the latest developments in Myanmar, or as well as on the issue of Rohingya issue, and as Professor Amena Madam mentioned about the India's membership in the United Nations Security Council. So how do you think that India is going to deal with the issues in Myanmar and Rohingya issue? I would say, and the question is in this context that when when India wants to develop its Northeast India, as you have mentioned, the regional country is also important. So in that context, how India is going to respond to these developments in Myanmar as well as in Rohingya issue. At the same time, there is also a point that when the USA is trying to adopt sanctions against Myanmar, the question that Myanmar may be tilted towards China, how India is going to respond to these issues. Thank you. Thank you all.
Yeah. Please unmute. Sreeradha Datta, ma'am, would you like to?
Yes, thank you. So, hi, good to see you here. You know, there's a lot of us have been constantly writing about the fact that we think that India should probably more overt. So I'm just saying that I do completely understand the issues that you raised. It's very pertinent, and we can't have a collaboration in place until unless we are sensitive to these ideas. And for India, I think at a different level, but they don't want to be seen as if they're doing anything, because we often talk, and I think many of us are also saying that we need to re-examine our border security issues. I mean, how beholden can we be? I mean, we need to, and I think I've written several times about the Rohingya issue and how critical it is, and how it's very, very difficult. It's a commendable job that Bangladesh is able to do in supporting the huge number of refugees there. So, and I do understand that India needs to be a little more proactive in that sense. India, of course, is trying to build houses there and having other conversations, but why I think the dealing with Myanmar is a different level, because if you try and do the stick with them, it doesn't work the other way. And stability at our borders is critical to India's core concerns. But I do understand, Isufan, where the conversation is, and I think there are attempts. Many of us who work with the policy makers, and we believe that we are being heard, and some of our writings are reaching the right places. We are constantly, urging the government that they need to be seen to be taking a different voice. Where I think something we have to be seen. While Bangladesh is a dear, most close neighbor for us, if we are not sensitive to their requirements, to their needs, then where is this entire thing going? So I do. Okay, there's a question here by Anushka. I thought Amena could reply to that. She works very closely.
Yeah, I can read the question. The question is how to make our bilateral relations gender inclusive. How can we encourage participation of women in promoting economic growth, prosperity, and peace in the region? I think the gender she is referring to also to border, how at the border women play an important role, and how we can make our bilateral relations gender inclusive. Over to you, Professor Mohsin.
How can you repeat the question, please, Rishi?
Okay, so the question is how to make our bilateral relations gender inclusive. How can we encourage participation of women in promoting economic growth, prosperity, and peace in the region?
Thank you very much. I mean, unfortunately, so far we have seen that our relations or foreign policy as such has not taken gender as a component, as a standalone category. I mean, though in Bangladesh we have a national action plan, and gender mainstreaming is one of the major key policies of government. But when it comes to bilateral relations, I mean, when we talk about different development projects, normally, governments have directives for gender mainstreaming, or there needs to be a gender focal point over there. But how far it is translated into actual action, that needs to be seen. And gender is not only about having women, it is also about institutions. If the institutions are I mean, this is a very conceptual thing. Again, I think, it's a big debate that if institutions are feminized enough, or if institutions are sensitive enough. So there are different issues. If your policies, if in your bilateral relations, if you are taking the people into account, if it is a pro-people approach, if you are taking if the policies cut across classes, if it is it is an inclusive development where minorities are included, it is also a gender sensitive policy. So so when I talk about gender, it is not, I do not equate gender with women. I equate gender with institutions as well. I mean, anything which is outside the purview of power, if you try to empower it, or if you try to bring those institutions or those sectors nearer to power, that is gender sensitivity for me, because we have in South Asia many women leaders, and we have not seen that. Not necessarily they have pursued pro-women policies. I don't want to go into that binary of woman versus man, but I would rather look at it at the point of intersectionality, where you cut across the divides of class, caste, religion, and it is a pro-people institution. Then I would say it is a gender sensitive and an inclusive policy. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we have had a very wonderful brainstorming session, and I must say that it was truly engaging, and it's so good to see many known faces as well as interact with the new faces. With this, I think we can conclude the session. And to end, I would also recognize the contribution made by Dr. Sreeradha, who is also present here. From day I studied this book, ma'am, your book, and she said better to discuss this book with the author herself than just reading and writing about it. So thank you, Dr. Sreeradha, and thank you, Sunil ji. Whatever initiatives I have taken so far, he has been backbone of promoting it as well as helping me in all the ways. So thank you all, and thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Professor Mohsin and other esteemed panelists. And with this, we conclude the session. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you. Such a pleasure. Thank you very much, Rishi and Sunil and everybody there, and all of you, Amena and